What you're hearing, as I'm sure most of you know, is one of the most iconic pieces of music in cinema history. Binary Sunset, better known as the Force theme, composed by John Williams for George Lucas's Star Wars. Together with the main theme, the Imperial March, and countless other historic pieces of music, Star Wars and its soundtrack would change cinema forever. This wasn't, however, the first John Williams film score. It wasn't even the only John Williams scored film to release in 1977, with Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind also making its theatrical debut. And both of these released just 2 years after Jaws, a movie commonly referred to as the first blockbuster, and the film that put Spielberg and Williams on the map.
My God, this guy must be 80 years old. I really thought,
Really?
I thought maybe here's some guy who's 80 years old who maybe wrote his greatest scores of his life. And I wanted to find out who this guy was, and I met this young man named John Williams. I was amazed.
Even by 1977, it was clear John Williams was something special, and he was just getting started. He went on to score The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark, E.T., Jurassic Park, Superman, and, of course, Return of the Jedi, among many, many others, before even the turn of the century. If you can think of a huge, genre-defining popular film from the late 20th century, chances are it was scored by John Williams. Together with Lucas and Spielberg, Williams defined the sound of late 20th century Hollywood. Orchestral and melody-driven, utilizing loud, often triumphant brass and light, textural strings. It's a warm, organic sound, especially compared to the blockbusters of today, and, reinforced by Williams' heartfelt themes, brings incredible depth and meaning to each story. The orchestral film score was first established by Max Steiner in his 1933 score for King Kong, proving incredibly successful in shaping audiences' perception of the events of the film. By the 1960s, though, the classical sound had seemingly run its course. John Williams came into the industry at a time when studios and directors were increasingly turning away from symphonic film music in favor of utilizing pop and folk music. Williams, however, preferred the classical Hollywood sound, characterized by the romanticism of 19th century composers, and also utilizing what Emilio Audusino calls Mickey Mousing. Mickey Mousing is a technique in which music adheres closely to the visuals through a tight series of explicit sync points. Musical gestures duplicate visual actions. Think of the Tom and Jerry cartoons, when Jerry Mouse moves stealthily around the house, accompanied by plucks of pizzicato strings synchronized to each of his steps. Williams was, in particular, influenced by the modernist composers of the late 19th and early 20th century. Richard Wagner for his use of leitmotif, which I'll come back to in a moment, Claude Debussy, and, in particular, Igor Stravinsky, whose Rite of Spring is quoted extensively in Williams' score for Star Wars. So Williams had a sound, but that's not to say he has no range.
The first day was Steven said, "What are you going to play for Jaws?" I went, he said, "You're kidding."
I said, "You're crazy. It's a serious movie."
Hey, he's taking it. Hey, go!
While Williams has remained symphonic his entire career, giving each of his films a similar overall atmosphere and soundscape, he's certainly capable of composing themes with very different moods. The infamous motif for the shark in Jaws is a great example. Leitmotif, which is a piece of music directly connected to a character or idea in a story, is where Williams truly shines. Think of the Imperial March from Star Wars, which is used to represent Darth Vader. The Force theme from earlier. Indiana Jones, Superman, or the main theme from Jurassic Park. These musical ideas are now inseparable from their respective films, being reused and woven throughout their scores. It's an incredibly powerful style of composing, allowing Williams to bring new meaning to a scene simply by referencing other parts of the score. Williams' music is, however, more than just his motifs, with full compositions inspiring a whole generation of other composers.
There's always the bravura part of the John Williams composition, the first 8, 16, 32 bars, the great Raiders of the Lost Ark theme. And then comes the B part. It's less well known, but it's so beautifully crafted. And I always think that's the part he writes for himself.
That was Hans Zimmer. You might know him for, well, this. Zimmer is arguably the most influential composer of the 21st century, and he couldn't be more different from John Williams. Zimmer is a self-taught musician with a background in the pop music of the 70s and 80s, which, not so coincidentally, saw a great shift towards electronic instruments during that period. While Zimmer has been iconic for his extensive use of percussion, rhythm, and loud brass since his 2010 score for Inception, even his earlier work was incredibly distinct from the John Williams classical sound. As Frank Lemon puts it, for many filmgoers, the music of German-born, Los Angeles-based composer Hans Zimmer is synonymous with an ill-defined but immediately recognized quality of the epic. Indeed, Zimmer's music, especially with his earlier work, has been derided by some for its emphasis on loudness or epicness, with a perceived lack of nuance or restraint shown by composers of the past. And this perception is not entirely wrong.
This is why he's a revolutionary. Hans took the string section and made them like a guitar.
Zimmer utilizes the orchestra in a completely different way. His scores were seen as rather simplistic and heavy-handed, limited in their musical vocabulary and untrained. And because of his immense influence on the industry, there was also a perception that he was ruining film music by displacing more symphonic scores in favor of the Zimmer style. Because of the prevalence of this Zimmer style in the early 2010s, Zimmer's early work does now feel distinctly simplistic and outdated, generic almost. It is both a testament to his influence, but also how far he's come as a composer. From my perspective, Hans Zimmer's sound began to change in 2014 with the release of Christopher Nolan's Interstellar. Zimmer extensively utilized piano and pipe organ alongside strings to create a sound not just unique to Zimmer, but importantly, unique to the film itself. It made Interstellar stand out, being a key part of the gloomy, isolated, yet grand atmosphere of the film. Sure, the simplistic composing style is still present, but for me this marked an important shift in Zimmer's goal. Not just to sound epic or cinematic, but rather a focus on soundscape, using unusual sounds or instrumentation to create an atmosphere and tone truly dedicated to the film. Since Interstellar, there have been 2 more films where Zimmer has truly gone 100%. Getting much more experimental and diverging even further from the Hans Zimmer sound. Those films are Denis Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049, released in 2017, and Dune, released in 2021. In 2049, Zimmer forgoes the orchestra altogether, opting for a purely electronic score in line with the original Blade Runner score by Vangelis. Making heavy use of synth horns, deep pads, and crafting a kind of grimy, mechanical soundscape to fit the desolate world of Los Angeles in the year 2049. It almost blurs the line between score and soundtrack. Zimmer also started to put more emphasis on leitmotif in this film, with distinct recurring music cues representing various themes. As for Dune, Zimmer reached his most experimental yet. On one hand, expanding on his work from 2049, yet, on the other, returning to a much more naturalistic sound with drums, guitars, winds, and ear-piercing vocals.
I remember as a 13-year-old going and seeing science fiction movies and going, why do all these science fiction movies have European orchestral sounds, romantic period tonalities about them?
Zimmer's current sound is very hard to pin down, constantly evolving with each new project. In some ways, he's returning to the John Williams tradition of leitmotif and a bit of melody, and in others, he's forging a completely new method of scoring films. If John Williams represents the romanticism and stability of classical Hollywood in the 20th century, then Zimmer, in turn, represents the change and uncertainty of the 21st, an evolving sound for an evolving industry. At 90 years old, Williams' career has all but ended, bearing iconic symphonies that have inspired and will continue to do so. Zimmer, on the other hand, has a long career ahead, and despite his 20 years of incredible influence as a composer, is, for me, really just getting started. With other composers like Michael Giacchino carrying on the Williams orchestral tradition and Hans Zimmer pushing the boundaries of how a movie can sound, the future is looking incredibly bright for film music.